Hi, everyone. This is Randy Kim from the Bunby Chronicles podcast, and I do have another emergency episode edition. And so I am joined here today with Francia Garcia Hernandez, who is the reporter of Block Club Chicago. And Block Club Chicago provides online digital journalism coverage of what's happening in all of Chicago's neighborhoods. And the reason why I decided to bring Francia on is because uh, she and so many community journalists have been covering the ongoing ICE raids. And I do, as a firm believer in community journalism, it's very important to bring information that's not being reported on legacy media. And so I want to give a trigger warning that there will be mention of ICE detainment violence, and other topics associated with ICE and police brutality and so forth. So, Francia, thank you so much for being on. How are you currently navigating this week in terms of um, covering the ICE raids?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. That is a great question. And as you mentioned, this is something that has been going on in, just ICE and Border Patrol being present in the city of Chicago and Chicago's neighborhoods for over a month now. And that's not to say agents weren't here before or the tensions weren't happening before, but this really intensified, ramped up presence of federal agents and operations has increased in the last month. The way we are covering it at Blog Club, and I think personally I can speak to that as well, is by, monitoring what's happening day in and day out in Chicago's neighborhoods and tracking tips of ICE presence in neighborhoods, in specific establishments. We are approaching it with a daily recap of confirmed ICE
Mhm.
sightings or detentions, relying on rapid response groups across the city and their reports because they have ICE everywhere and, boots on the
Mhm.
ground everywhere. And we're also following specific tips, specific incidents like these very visible operations in the Southwest Side, in South Shore, in East Chicago this week. So it's kind of like a twofold approach, focusing on tips that we get, focusing on big, very visible operations, and in some cases, those that have been seen with a lot of use of force by federal agents, and then also tracking individual detainments best as we can that are spotted and reported through rapid response groups.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of rapid response groups, Meta had already announced that, well, they had suspended the ICE watch in for the Chicagoland, and that was also due the pressure of the DOJ, the Department of Justice in the United States. I was wondering, because of what's going on, what community groups, how have they pivoted since since the Meta ban on ICE watch groups?
Yes, so I think that's something that we're still seeing how it plays out. This specific page that got shut down was a larger one, very active page where anyone was able to post ICE sightings or reports of somebody getting detained by ICE. Other rapid response groups use Facebook as well and other like Meta company related social media platforms. But they have their specific pages where they share information. Some people, are using other types of communication like signal groups or WhatsApp groups to get this information out. So it hasn't been like a widespread ban, like every single account of a rapid response group in Chicago has been banned or suspended. We haven't seen that happen, but it was concerning, I think, to many to see that one page where people were posting kind of like immediately tips of where they saw ICE in Chicago and the Chicagoland area got shut down. However, that hasn't stopped other efforts and other pages.
What neighborhoods have you been specifically covering, and what have you observed with the ICE presence in these neighborhoods and how it's impacting small businesses, community folks, pl institutional places, whether it's churches, temples, universities, school districts? I'm very curious to see what you're seeing from the neighborhoods that you've covered specifically.
Yes, I cover Pilsen Little Village, back of the yards, and parts of the southwest side, like Brighton Park, Gage Park, Midway, West Lawn. At the very start of Operation Midway Blitz and before Operation at Large, which is Border Patrol's led operation here in Chicago, was announced, we had seen reports of three people getting detained on a Sunday at the start of September in Brighton Park, Archer Heights area. The next day and in the weeks to follow, we started seeing more ICE presence and more reports of ICE agents in these neighborhoods, specifically Brighton Park, back of the yards. Um, in these neighborhoods, talking to organizers, talking to officials, talking to neighbors, what we have seen is a widespread sense that agents are present at all times, followed by reports of rapid response groups confirming that indeed, agents, Border Patrol and ICE agents have been in corridors along these neighborhoods, have been there pretty much every day since the start of Midway Blitz. Uh, Small businesses have reported from the beginning, lower foot traffic, lower people coming into restaurants and shops, and that has only intensified as the presence of federal agents has intensified as well. We have seen and heard from business owners in Little Village, in Pilsen, who are seeing less customers come in, who are really kind of like worried about what this could look like. I have reported on street vendors as well, who are very, prominent in these neighborhoods. Many of them are choosing to stay home out of fear
Mm,
for being, detained or targeted. Um, those who are going out have reported lower sales, or like in some cases, it might not even be worth being out there because they're just not selling their products. So it is having a trickling effect. Also, when it comes to schools, there have been several times where like there has been an alert about agents in the neighborhood near schools
mm,
where neighbors, so those who can mobilize and try to keep watch outside schools or near schools to alert people if indeed agents come out near school let out time. And in other cases, we have also heard that, people are choosing not to drive their kids to school, and other neighbors who can offering and stepping up to say, like, I can do your groceries, I
mm.
can take your kids to school, I can pick up your kids to school. So it's really disrupted, daily life for many of the neighbors who live in these areas in a lot of different ways.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that part, and which also leads me to the next question of law enforcement. Where is Chicago law enforcement and Illinois State Police in this? Because they're also obviously monitoring the communities. What has that looked like from what you've observed and from what the community folks have shared with? I'm very curious to see what their role is, whether they're abetting ICE agents, federal agents, or are they protecting clients? I think that there needs to be more of a clearer understanding of what's happening and their role.
Yes, that is a, that's a question, and that's a comment that I think has come up repeatedly since really since the start of Midway Blitz, and even before, when we saw federal agents detain people in the South Loop and Chicago police arrived at the scene. That was back in June. Um, Police is often or has often been seen at these larger demonstrations where federal agents maybe have been in certain neighborhoods like the Southwest Side or like East Side Chicago this week. And police has stated they're there because a big crowd forms and they're there to assist with traffic control or public safety reasons. They are by state and city laws not allowed to help ICE, but they're also not allowed to intervene. Meaning, in some cases, they will be there, and in some cases, community members have raised concerns that maybe it looks more like they're there to guard federal agents than to
Mhm.
protect the community. But they're there in most of these cases, as they have stated, to assist with like traffic control, crowd control, that kind of thing. In some recent incidents, one in the southwest side of Chicago, one in east side, there were reports and video and photo evidence that even police got tear gassed by federal agents and had to
Hmm.
like seek assistance. And in many cases, neighbors in these areas have assisted police as well. But it's definitely been a question that keeps coming up and something that many neighbors are wondering, like, what is the role of police here? And when they show up with federal agents, having showed up before, what does that look like? And what could police do, if anything else?
Hmm. And Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, what has his response been with talking with the Chicago Police Department, and also maybe for a larger question with Governor Pritzker in terms of where the role of police plays into this?
Yes, both the Chicago mayor and Superintendent Larry Snelling from the Chicago Police Department have clearly stated and publicly stated multiple times that police will not be cooperating or assisting with any immigration enforcement operation. That has been a message that has been repeated from the start, and that has been very publicly said. That in itself does not always, resolve the question of like how can police act in a moment of um action, right?
Mhm.
Like that is very easy to say as a broad statement, but
Mhm.
what that looks like when there are 40 Border Patrol agents tear gassing people, even peaceful protesters, older people, children or teenagers, and police is there, that looks a little bit different. But that's been the message based on the sanctuary city and state
Mhm.
laws, right? Like
Mhm.
police cannot help, but police cannot intervene either. So that's been the message. Another thing that has been clearly communicated by Superintendent Larry Snelling is that the existing laws and the reason why sanctuary laws work is because police can um, I don't want to say can help, but like if there is a civil, not a civil, if there's a criminal warrant for somebody's detention, then that changes things. But in essence, police will not cooperate on civil arrests or just detaining someone or honoring ICE detainers. If there is a criminal warrant for somebody, then that's different, and that's why sanctuary laws have been upheld in the
Do
past.
mhm. Do we know the number of folks that have been detained from Chicago since the start of Operation Midway? And also, do we know the whereabouts? Because been a lot of uncertainty of where um, detainees are being taken to, how long they are, and the fact that they are not getting access to talk to their family members, to their immigration attorneys or attorneys, I should say. Um, what have you learned about their whereabouts? What's happening to them right as we speak, especially for those that have legalized status and non-legalized status?
Yes, that is a complicated question, but we know as of the latest release by the Department of Homeland Security, it was looking like 1,500 people had been detained in Chicago and the Chicagoland area since the start of Operation Midway Blitz. That is as much of the information that is shared. We don't necessarily have seen, specifics of how many arrests took place in each neighborhood or suburban town, how many arrests happen daily, who was arrested, or why people were arrested. Like there is not no transparency on the Department of Homeland Security side to do this on a daily basis, but every once in a while they have released figures as of how many people have been detained in total. Um, when it comes to knowing where people are being taken, we have heard reports of people getting detained and being immediately moved to the Broadview ICE Processing Center
Mhm.
in suburban Broadview. It's important to note this was a processing center and it's not supposed to be a detention center, meaning it doesn't have like the infrastructure to hold people there for a
Mhm.
long time or more than
Mhm.
12 hours. There are like no beds, no showers, there isn't like a cafeteria where people can access food and other things. So there have been reports from really dating months back about inhumane conditions that people were being held in at Broadview and state lawmakers trying to investigate and visit the center. In many cases, people are being kept at Broadview longer than law allows them to be kept there and then moved to out-of-state facilities everywhere in really in the Midwest and even in other parts of the country, such as Texas. And for those who are not able to access legal aid or who are eligible for expedited removal, they have been quickly deported in some cases. So it's a mix of where people are being held and how they are being held.
What have you noticed from a journalism experience or journalist experience, I should clarify, because Law Club Chicago's has had like four reporters that were tear gassed or attacked by I believe it was either ICE or police. I'm not exactly sure if you can clarify that part, but also what happened with the WGN producer, where she was forcibly detained on live video. What are community journalists, from what you have seen from Block Club and maybe what other community journalists, what have they been experiencing from ICE agents when they're covering these stories?
Yes, four of our Block Club reporters were tear gassed when they were covering protests in Broadview. They were part of crowds of journalists and peaceful protesters that were tear gassed, shot with pepper bullets, and it was mostly federal agents. It's pretty clear that it was either ICE and or Border Patrol in some of these instances. It's been more than like one case, and other media reporters have called out the same thing. There was a CBS TV reported that said she was targeted, or it appeared to be targeted, that her van, her news van, was shot with a chemical weapon that got inside the vehicle, and everybody inside the vehicle had tear gas in on their faces. So it's been something that we have seen. The case you mentioned about a WGN reporter, I mean producer, sorry. That happened Friday. It appears that she was not working for the station at the time she was detained. She was on her way to work when she was detained by federal agents who threw her to the ground, as it is seen on video and witness statements. Other witnesses from that incident said it appeared agents had detained another man who was inside a van, and then they moved to detain this woman who is a U.S. citizen and an employee of WGN. She was later released. She was held for a few hours, later released without charges, even though the Department of Homeland Security has stated that she threw a metal object at agents, and that's the reason for her detainment. But so far, charges have not been filed against her, and she released a statement yesterday with her attorneys saying that she will pursue legal action about this detainment and denies that she threw any sort of metal object at agents. She was just filming the detainment of somebody. So these are, like you mentioned, these are some of the cases that we're seeing here in Chicago. And, as reporters, we are definitely taking precaution. If we're covering protests in Broadview or elsewhere, many of us are using personal protection equipment like
Mhm.
masks and goggles to protect ourselves from tear gas and other chemical agents if they're used. So we are taking precautions for covering what's happening because of the um, escalating tactics that we have seen are being used by federal agents.
I'm also wondering about where traditional media outlets like WGN, NBC, ABC, there's been a lot of criticism that they have been receiving for not being responsive or also like really covering the full scope. What has Block Club or Borderless Magazine or Unraveled? I know you can speak for other hyper community journalists, but I am wondering about what have you have been doing that traditional legacy media outlets have not been covering. Because I think that there's a lot of different narrative shifts, and I think that there needs to be more of a clarity of where people are getting their information and where the misinformation is coming from.
Right. I think one of the advantages of Blog Club, and I can speak about Blog Club because I work there,
Mhm,
is that we've been covering Chicago neighborhoods for years. So we have the, understanding of the context, we have sources there, we have a pretty good idea of what this neighborhood looks like and what it looked like before, federal agents showed up and how it's changing or how it's being affected by the presence of federal agents. I think that's very important information when we're reporting about what's happening because we can understand and bring that nuanced coverage of what is happening in depth. Um, because we have those relationships as well, we're talking to neighbors and yes, we're talking to elected officials, but we're also talking to the people who live in these neighborhoods and can say firsthand what they're seeing in their neighborhoods happening. They can connect us to people who have been affected. They can connect us to people who have been detained. We're also tapped into these neighborhoods, so we're able to share some of the ways that Chicagoans are responding to what's
mhm,
happening and how they're organizing themselves, how they're coming up with solutions or ideas to try to protect each other, to protect their neighbors, and to keep documenting
mhm,
the presence of ICE and Border Patrol and other federal agents in their neighborhoods. So these are some of the things that we are covering. And I think that's what makes our coverage unique, that we are, giving room for all of these neighbors to
mhm,
really share what's happening in their communities. And lastly, I think one of the things we're doing is keeping like an eight eyes daily recap of what we hear is happening day in and day out. That's not to say we have, every single thing that happened in the
mhm,
city of Chicago every single day when it comes to the detention of people by federal agents, but we are keeping track and kind of like
mhm,
showing people information about what has been confirmed. And I think that's helpful just because there can be so much
mhm,
information on social media. There can be so many tips
mhm,
and like videos shared. And we are doing our work to confirm and verify these and provide that information.
mhm. For the Illinois Coalition of Immigrant Refugee Rights, they've been working overtime to supply information, and they have their own hotline to report ICE sightings. And also with immigration attorneys in the courts, what are you seeing from their response so far at this time when, the goalpost keeps moving from the ICE, from the federal government and ICE?
Yes, the both groups, Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, and other like civil rights and immigrant justice groups like the National Immigrant Justice Center and the ACLU of Illinois, have brought forward complaints. So they have sued the federal administration for unlawful arrests in both in the first 10 days of the Trump administration and later during Operation Midway Blitz. These groups have also provided, legal aid, and in the case of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, they manage the statewide hotline where tips are being sent to, and then, dispersed through rapid response groups, but they also provide services for families who are affected by the detention of a family member or, someone they know. So in the legal front, I think it's been important to see one of these lawsuits that was brought forward um, earlier this year. There was a decision about it, I want to say last week or maybe 2 weeks ago. Now the weeks are all blurring together. But a federal judge ruled that in 22 out of 26 cases that NIJC and ACLU of Illinois brought forward, ICE had
Mhm,
made an unlawful arrest. There is context to this. So previously, ICE agreed to a settlement agreement out of another lawsuit from a 2018 ICE operation here in Chicago. And that agreement established that ICE could not make arrests without a warrant and that it had to have probable cause to make arrests.
mhm,
The court found that in 22 of 26 cases, that did not happen. And ruled that these settlement agreement needs to be extended until next year, the start of next year, and that ICE must abide by this. Um, and for those who were detained unlawfully, it ruled that ICE had to pay them back the bond costs and any other costs that they incurred during those detentions. There are more cases that were brought forward under this type of lawsuit
Mm,
that are still being litigated. And I know these two groups said that they had received reports of about 70 more cases that they're
mm,
looking into.
mm,
So there is something that these groups are doing and the courts are deciding on that could impact how ICE and Border Patrol
mm,
do these operations.
mm. Yeah, so I also want to give a timestamp to listeners. It is 11:30 a.m. U.S. Central Standard Time, October 16th, Thursday. With that said, October 18th is the No Kings protest. What have you learned so far from communities and elected officials and folks that are getting prepared for No Kings, and how um, maybe from what you're seeing, what responses do you what responses are ICE making and the federal government making in preparation for the No Kings protest in Chicago?
That's a good question. I know we have heard a lot of interest in many groups and neighbors and organizers planning to attend the No Kings March, similar to what we've seen in the past, where some of these protests garnered thousands of people to
Mm,
join. Um, In terms of, prepping for them, I know many organizers and groups have shared information about how to stay safe during a protest, how to prepare, and for some people, how to assess the risk and decide whether they should be attending or not. So this has been ongoing since the start of protests, and this continues to be the case. So far, I have not heard much about the response from federal agents, but we do know that there is a constitutional right to protest and peacefully assemble in this country. So that should prevail when people gather and protest this oncoming Saturday.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me and really breaking down the real-time happenings in Chicago as we speak in regards to ICE. I wonder if there's any lasting remarks or anything that comes up that you feel listeners really need to be aware of.
Yes, there is, a lot going on, and we at Blog Club and many other local media outlets are trying to bring out coverage. But one of the things that I think is important is if people are seeing something, and recording it on their phones and, getting documentation of any detention or the presence of agents in their neighborhoods, it's important that they can share that as well with Chicago journalists because that's a way for us to also investigate and figure out what's happening. So there's an effort by Chicago journalists to collect video and photo evidence of the tensions to report and for reporting purposes. So if people are interested in sharing that footage with us, you can do so. There is a link that I can share with you,
Hmm.
and maybe you can include with the episode where people can
Absolutely.
send their video footage. And that's also in, my personal um, professional page on social media, and many other journalists in Chicago have shared it as well.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you so much, Francia, for being on my show. I really believe in the value of community journalism, hyper community journalism in this case, and also I think it's very important for folks to really see what is happening and also how communities are responding. So thank you for really shedding a lot of light into that. And also I hope that for folks that they could follow Block Club Chicago on social media, but also do their webpage where they can get updates on what is happening in real time with the ice raids, but also with the current atmosphere of this climate in Chicago. So I really thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to, well, I don't want to say I really look forward, but I'm eager to see um what more stories are coming out, or what is emerging from what is happening. So keep up the wonderful work that you are all doing. And I think this is such a very important time right now to speak on what's happening.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you for everyone who reads, shares, reposts our stories, and also anyone who shares tips. We're doing our best to cover what's happening in our neighborhoods, and we can't do it without people sharing what they're seeing as well.
Thank you so much, and please take care.
Thank you.